Greetings, comrades. I've got more Inventing Reality by Michael Parenti for you. Today we are talking about chapter 6, titled Giving Labor the Business. Basically, we're talking about working people getting screwed over, same as it ever was. Obviously with a focus on the way the media reports these things. Subsection 1 is titled Business over Labor. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is the language that is used when the media is reporting on labor disputes, strikes, unionizing in general, things like that. So media, obviously pro-business, anti-labor bias, talking about Reagan's tax reforms, right? And just reporting the terminology that the ruling class uses, like talking about tax cuts, not specifying that these are for the rich and not the working class. In the 90s, the Democrats proposed a tax increase for the rich, and that was reported as like class warfare in a negative connotation, right? Back to like the language used when reporting, the term special interest tends to be used to explain things like unions and working class people. And then national interest is used when we're talking about corporations and the war machine. At the time, again, this was written in like 91, the LA Times was said to favor business over labor by 54% to 7%, with the other 39 claiming to be impartial. You know, the news always reports on the stock market, the Dow Jones, but they're not talking about industrial accidents, evictions, environmental violations, right? These things that affect working people. We're only told about the things that affect the rich, the ruling class. Obviously, there's a lot of negative reporting on strikes, any opportunity really to trash the unions, but not talking about wage theft and again, things that affect the working class. There was a quote that I wanted to read on page 101. Let's see. Industrial strife is never characterized in the media as an expression of class struggle, with the capitalist relentlessly accumulating as much of the wealth created by labor as possible, and workers fighting back in order to protect or improve their standard of living. Little attention is given to management's multi-million-dollar union-busting efforts and its tendency to coerce labor into giving back hard-won benefits and protections. The impression of who is giving and who is grabbing is inverted in a business-owned press that portrays management as making offers and labor as making demands. The struggles between workers and bosses are called labor problems and labor disputes, never management disputes, even when it is management that refuses to negotiate a contract, as is often the case, right? Section 2, nice bosses, crazy strikers. And so we're specifically looking at several different strike actions, mostly from the late 70s through the early 90s. And the way these were reported on, right? So a coal strike from 77 to 78, the United Mine Workers, I think is what UMW stands for, calling these miners as inbred and violent. And, the way the Pinkertons and the cops and the National Guard were sent to break up these strikes, not being reported on the government and the powers that be siding with management, but just as the government is impartial trying to protect people, which we know is not true. There was a steelworker strike. Again, they're blaming the workers. When we talk about pro sports, again, these guys make so much money. What are they complaining about? When we know that, pro athletes are still, and this is controversial, they are still workers. They are still working class. They sell their labor to their boss, who is literally called their owner, right? It's pretty gross. So yes, just because they're well paid doesn't mean that they don't absolutely destroy their bodies and are very often left with nothing afterwards. Flint, Michigan sit-down strike in 37. Also, reported on the side of management. And then he compares that with a USSR coal strike in 1989, where because this is an opportunity to shit on the Soviet Union. So of course they're gonna give the workers a little more sympathy, instead, and comparing that with the way American workers are reported on in the press. Section 3 is called the invisible worker. At the time, there were 100 million working people, often ignored. Less than 1% of news time covered unions. And even then, only when there was a strike, and again, portrayed as the bad guys, right? The unions are the bad guys. Anytime there's like mob connections, they're happy to talk about that, but not about the real like working class, the reason that people need unions, right? Working class issues are sidelined. Labor news is sparse and superficial, and again, favors management. They ignore the hoarding of wealth by the ownership class, and the cause of a strike is very often ignored. Everything that led up to the point of the strike, they don't want to talk about. They're just talking about the strike. And so that really leaves people thinking that these unions are crazy and demanding and they're stopping work. Like, why won't they just be happy? And of course, the focus to the damage on the economy is talked about again. So always ignoring working class solidarity when one union might be helping another. If the farm workers are helping feed the striking coal miners, it's something that they don't want to talk about, this solidarity, because they know it'll spread, and that working class people, once we unite, we will be unstoppable. The government is portrayed as neutral along with the cops. And the point of this, as well as the result of it, is that it gives working class people that consume this news a negative view of unions. And so they're less likely to join a union themselves. And it discourages organizing efforts in general, thus crushing the working class once again. So thank you for listening. Cheers.